I was working at a hotel in Dubai. A British couple checked in and the wife looked around the lobby, clearly confused. She leaned over to me and whispered, "So, when do we have to start wearing the robes and riding camels? Is that mandatory here or just encouraged?" I explained that Dubai is a modern city and nobody rides camels to work. She looked genuinely surprised and said, "Oh, but I've seen photos." Her husband chimed in, "Yeah, we thought it was all desert and tents. Where are the actual buildings?" I gestured to the floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city skyline. He said, "Oh, right, but those are probably just for tourists, though, aren't they? The real Dubai is out in the desert somewhere." I work as a tour guide in Japan. A British man on my Tokyo tour asked me, very earnestly, "So do you all still live with your parents until you get married? And do you sleep on the floor in those paper houses?" I explained that most Japanese people live in modern apartments with beds and furniture, just like anywhere else. He looked disappointed and said, "But what about the geishas and the samurais? When do we see them?" I told him geishas are rare cultural performers and samurais haven't existed for over 150 years. His wife said, "Well, that's a shame. We've come all this way expecting traditional Japan and it's just a normal city." They spent the whole tour complaining that Tokyo was too modern and asking when we'd get to the real Japan. I was working at a restaurant in Mexico City. A British woman asked me if the water was safe to drink. I told her yes, in the restaurant it's filtered and perfectly safe. She shook her head and said, "No offence, but I've heard you can't drink the water in Mexico. I'll stick to beer." Her husband added, "Yeah, we don't want Montezuma's revenge, do we?" Best to be safe, I explained that Mexico City has modern water infrastructure. The woman said, "But it's a developing country, right? So the water can't be as good as British water." I pointed out that the restaurant had a 5-star hygiene rating. She said, "Yeah, but 5 stars here probably means 3 stars in England. They ordered bottled water from France." I work at a tourist office in Reykjavik, Iceland. A British couple came in and asked what time it gets dark. I explained that in summer, during the midnight sun, it doesn't really get dark. The man looked at me like I was lying and said, "That's not possible. The sun has to set. That's what it does." His wife asked, "So does the government just keep the lights on all night to pretend it's daytime?" I tried to explain the science behind the midnight sun and Iceland's location near the Arctic Circle. He cut me off and said, "Look, I'm not stupid. The sun rises and sets everywhere. You're probably just saying this to make Iceland seem special." They refused to believe me until they stayed up all night and saw for themselves. The next day, they came back and asked if we could turn the sun off because they couldn't sleep. I was a diving instructor in Thailand. A British woman on her first dive briefing asked me, "Are there sharks?" I said yes occasionally, but they're harmless reef sharks. She looked terrified and said, "But sharks are dangerous. They attack people. I've seen Jaws." I explained that reef sharks are nothing like the shark in Jaws, and attacks are incredibly rare. Her husband said, "Yeah, but this is Thailand. The sharks here are probably more aggressive because they're not regulated like British sharks." I informed him that Britain doesn't have tropical sharks and Thai sharks are no different from sharks anywhere else. He said, "Well, I still think British waters are safer because we have rules." They cancelled the dive and spent the day on the beach, refusing to go in past their knees. I work at a cultural centre in India. A British man asked me, "So do you all still worship cows and refuse to eat them?" I explained that Hinduism considers cows sacred, but India is a diverse country with many religions and dietary practices. He said, "But it's weird though, isn't it? Cows are just animals." His wife added, "And don't you eat with your hands? That seems unhygienic." I explained that eating with hands is traditional in some contexts, but Indians also use cutlery. She said, "I could never do that. I'd feel too primitive." The man then asked if we had any British food available because he didn't trust curry. I pointed out he was in India. He said, "Yeah, but surely you've got some normal food for tourists." I was working at a ski resort in Switzerland. A British family arrived and the father asked me, "So is Switzerland the one with the Alps or is that Austria?" I confirmed it was Switzerland. He said, "Right, and you're the ones with the chocolate and the watches, yeah?" I said, "Yes." He then asked, "But you're part of Germany, aren't you?" I explained that Switzerland is an independent country. He looked confused and said, "But you speak German, so you must be German." I told him Switzerland has 4 official languages and is definitely not part of Germany. His teenage daughter chimed in, "Dad, I think Switzerland is the one that's always neutral in wars." He said, "Oh, right, so you lot just hide in the mountains then." I decided to just hand them their ski passes and let them go. I work at a museum in Egypt. A British woman stood in front of the pyramids and asked me, "So how long did it take to build these? Like a few months?" I explained they took decades and required thousands of workers. She said, "Really? But they're just triangles. How hard can it be?" I told her about the massive stone blocks, the precise engineering and the lack of modern machinery. She waved me off and said, yeah, but ancient people didn't have health and safety or tea breaks, so they probably worked faster than we would today. Her husband asked if the pyramids were built as movie sets originally. I asked what he meant. He said, for those old Hollywood films about Egypt. I had to explain that the pyramids are 4,500 years old. He said, what, older than England? That can't be right. I was a waiter at a restaurant in Spain. A British couple sat down and the man asked me, what time is dinner? I told him the kitchen opens at 8 p.m. He looked shocked and said, 8? That's nearly midnight. Why do you eat so late? Don't you get hungry? I explained that in Spain, people typically eat dinner between 9 and 10 p.m. His wife said, that's ridiculous. We eat at 6 like normal people. Can't you open the kitchen early just for us? I told her the chef wasn't in yet. She said, well, this is why Spain is always in crisis. Nobody works proper hours. The man added, in England, we eat at sensible times and we run our country properly. You lot should take notes. They ended up eating at a McDonald's and told everyone back home that Spanish culture was backward. I work at a zoo in Australia. A British man asked me, so where do you keep the really dangerous animals, like the ones that kill you? I explained that our venomous snakes and spiders are in controlled habitats. He said, no, I mean the ones just walking around. I've heard everything in Australia is trying to kill you. I assured him that while we have dangerous wildlife, they're not roaming the streets. He didn't believe me and said, you're just saying that so tourists don't panic. His wife refused to leave the city centre the entire trip because she was convinced a crocodile would eat her in the suburbs. They left a review saying Australia was overhyped and not as dangerous as advertised. I was working at a tourist shop in New York. A British woman asked me, do Americans celebrate Christmas or is that just a British thing? I told her Americans absolutely celebrate Christmas. She said, oh, but it's not the same though, is it? Because you don't have the Queen's speech. I explained that Christmas traditions exist worldwide and predate the British monarchy. She said, well, I suppose you do your best with what you've got. Then she asked if Americans know who the royal family are. I said, some do. She looked smug and said, see, we're still relevant even over here. If you've enjoyed this little tour of British tourist logic, smash that like button and subscribe. We've got loads more of this coming your way. Cheers.